So in our last session, we talked all about chord theory, and we worked on kind of two main things. One was the fact that you could take any chord on the ukulele that you normally play, like say a C chord, and if you imagine that this right here, which is called the nut, if you imagine that your index finger were barred across it, you could actually fret with your other fingers and move it up and be able to play 12 different versions of any chord. And so we worked on that with some major chords and some minor chords. We learned that, major and minor chords have different sort of sounds. I compared a major chord to being kind of like a sunny day and a minor chord kind of like a rainy day. They give different vibes and different sounds, and those are examples of triads, which are 3-note chords. I know it's a lot of stuff to consider and take in. Keep in mind, it's a lot of music theory is required to understand all these things. But if you just sort of start to grasp, okay, major and minor, these are basic chords that include 3 notes, you can really start to understand a lot more about how chords work and what we're going to be talking about today, how to extend them a little bit. So I want to start off today with any questions people might have from last session involving these chords and moving them or anything really. Any questions at all? Awesome. Well, it looks like there's no questions. So let's go ahead and start talking about chord extensions. Now, this is a really rich concept. If you were to go study this stuff in college, you're going to be like several quarters into studying before you start talking about this stuff. So keep that in mind as we're working through it. It's makes sense if it doesn't all make sense if you haven't studied this stuff before. But the gist of it is most chords are 3 notes, which we call triads. And the 2 most common types that we see are major and minor triads, right? 3-note chords. Now, the funny thing about 3-note chords is in some ways they're a little bit harder on the ukulele because we have 4 strings. The fact that we have 4 strings means that if we play a 3-note chord on the 4 strings, we have to double one of these 3 notes to play it on the ukulele, or we have to mute a string, but no one wants to do that, right? So what note we double from the triad does not matter at all. It doesn't matter which note we double from the chord. We're just going to double one of them. If we look at a couple examples, if I play a C chord, I'm playing a C note both here on my open C as well as here on my 3 on the A. They're in an octave, which means it's the same note, but you hear how one's higher and one's lower, but still the C is doubled. If I were to go to, say, an F chord, which looks something like this, and I play my G string and my A string, you'll notice, that's the same thing. Those are both an A note, which is a different note of the chord, right? It's not the F note, but it doesn't matter as long as one of those notes is doubled. The problem with doing this, especially in the case of like an F chord, is when you double the note and it's the same octave as it is on my high G ukulele here, it just gives you a little bit of a thin sound, right? What we can do is we can use extra notes, give ourselves the opportunity to play maybe a 4th note so that each string can be playing a different note when we're playing a chord, which creates a richer, more full sound for when we want it. Now, if you remember in our last session, we talked about a chord comprises of a 1st, 3rd, and 5th, right? And we practiced kind of counting through that. So for instance, our C chord was C, D, E, F, G. Right? When we're looking at our chord, it kind of always skips that. It's the 1, the 3, and the 5. Well, following this little format, what would the next note of the chord be? Well, if we go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it would be then 6, 7. And that number 7 is the most common form of an extension that we'll see to a chord. So if we think about that for a moment, what is the 7th letter of the alphabet, the musical alphabet, with C? Well, we have C, D, E, F, G, and then what comes after G? It's not H, it's A, and then B. So the 7th of C is going to be that B. And if we played a C chord, a C major chord, and we add a B note to it, which will be this note right here, just the 2nd fret of the A string, and we play this, this would be called a C major 7 chord. And when we listen to it, it's quite a bit richer than just a C chord, right? I'm not saying it's better, it's got a different function. It's Very jazzy, isn't it, right? But you hear it still has that sort of resolved major sound, doesn't it? It's just, you know, sounds like a more mature version of C or something like that, right? But now we have 4 different notes being played on our ukulele, and that's a really powerful thing to do with this instrument because we're maximizing each one of the strings. Not one of them is doubling anything, right? So this is called a C major 7 chord. Let's work on another major 7 chord just for a moment. Look back to that G chord we talked about a moment ago. Well, what we need to do now with the G is we need to add that major 7th interval, and this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Because if we think about it, we go G, A, B, C, D, G, B, and D. And then what's the 7th note going to be? Well, what comes after D is E, and what comes after E is F, right? But this is where music theory kind of comes into play. If we played an F note with it, with a G, you'll notice that this right here is actually called a G7 chord. You've probably played it before, right? Well, if you look, what did I do with my G there? I took my G, which was here on the 3rd fret of the E string, and where did I put it? How many frets down? I actually put it 2 frets down to the F, right? Well, with the C, I only put it down 1 fret from the C to the B. So what's going on there, right? Well, the distance that that note has to the 7th will dictate the name of the 7th chord that it is. So when we go down 1 fret, like we did from our C to our C major 7, it is a major 7 chord. But if we go down 2 frets, like we are right here from this G to this F, it's called a 7 chord. I know that's kind of confusing, right? Just 7? But it was a major chord. So what, isn't it a major 7? I didn't make up the names. The most common way we'll call this is just G7. But another name for it that you'll hear, especially in the realm of jazz, is a G dominant 7 chord. And that kind of implies that that 7 is lowered by the full step instead of the half step that a major goes down. Now this is a lot of concept. This is very, very rich, isn't it? Right? There's a lot going on here. Why are we looking at G to F this way and C to B this way? It's a lot going on. But if you just try to maintain, okay, if I play a major chord and I lower that first note by 1, I get a major 7 chord. And if I lower it by 2, I get a 7 chord, which here on the C, if we did that same little thing, we now have a C7, which you've probably played a C7 like this before, right? This is a B flat note. The name is obviously important, but for today, it might not be important for you to remember all the names. It's okay to just, again, 1 fret down, the major 7, 2 frets down, the dominant 7, or just 7. At the same time with my G chord, remember how we played a G and then we played a G7? Well, if we go down only 1 fret, oh, that's kind of tough, isn't it? How do I move that down? Well, the easiest way to do that is to just bar across the 2nd fret of the C, the E, and the A strings, just like this. 0, 2, 2, 2. And if you play that, one of my favorite chords, it's a G major 7 chord. Because again, the name of the chord, the G, just went down 1 fret instead of 2. And let's just listen to this for a little bit. When I play this G major 7, and then I'll play like the C major 7. When you listen to this sound, what do you feel? What do you think of, right? I feel like it's a very kind of ethereal type of sound. It's very jazzy, kind of laid back, right? It's like chilling under the clouds or something like that. That's what major 7 chords can give you. If you just play G to C, you don't get that same effect, do you? Right? But if you play G major 7 to C major 7, it gives you a little bit different of a sound, right? At the same time, what if we played a G7 and then we played a C7? This creates a very different sound entirely too, doesn't it? Right? This might sound a little bit like, well, it's a little bluesy, right? Kind of crazy. We're just changing 1 note of the chords, and it can completely alter the identity of what the sound is. If I just play G to C though, does this sound very bluesy to you? Or very jazzy to you? Not necessarily, right? But let's do the major 7s. That sounds so jazzy, right? So laid back. Now I'm going to play the sevens, the dominant sevens. Now all of a sudden it's the blues, right? And those are all major chords, which is just mind-blowing, right? Because we have G to C, and I'm playing it where it's just the normal 3-note chord with one of the notes being doubled in each. And I do the major sevens, where now we have that lowered by 1 fret to create that sound. And then the dominant sevens, or just known as sevens, which is lowering by 2 frets. And it creates this bluesy sound. So if nothing else, you can just start to hear that the sevenths, those chord extensions, just give further color and sound to the chords to create different ideas. So if you're ever playing a chord progression and it's a little bit boring, even if you know nothing about music theory, you can try seeing if you can change to maybe a major 7 or a dominant 7, also known just as 7, and see if it fits your song a little bit better. Maybe you want it to be a little more bluesy, try switching it up. Even if music theory says you shouldn't do that, at the end of the day, if it sounds good and you enjoy it, then you're doing it right. And so this can be a good way to kind of just create some different sounds. Now to go with this, that's just major, right? Last time in our last session, we talked about major and minor chords, kind of giving you this sunny day versus rainy day type of vibe, right? Well, if we think about that again, you know, the G major might be just a sunny day. The G major 7 might be like, I don't know, sunset or something, right? It's very moody. And then the G7 is like, oh, it's, you know, what's going on here? Maybe this is sun and rain at the same time somehow, right? It's kind of tense, but also fun, right? Well, with the minors, we can also add an extension to it. And my favorite one to show this with is our A minor chord. So let's go ahead and play an A minor. Looks something like this, just the 2nd fret here on the G string. And now we're going to play an A minor 7 chord. Now, if you've played an A minor 7 chord before, please raise your left hand. Okay. If you have not played an A minor 7 chord before, please raise your left hand and strum your ukulele, because you are now playing an A minor 7 chord, because we just took that A note that was here on the G string, right? We've got it doubled, and we lowered it by 2 frets to make it a G note, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That works out. And we're playing an A minor 7 chord. Unlike the major chords, minor chords are a little bit less picky. We don't have the 2 different versions of minor chords that are used really commonly. The most often time we're playing an extension on minor chord, it's going to be a minor 7. There are obviously times we play other extensions, no question, but this is just the most common. And it works more consistently because of that than the major chords. Minor 7 chords I love because they just always kind of sound good. And it's why the ukulele is such a cool instrument. The open tuning of the ukulele is an A minor 7 chord. It is a chord. How cool is that, right? Not many instruments just are music off the get-go, just being played. I love that about this instrument. So this is an A minor 7. So whatever we bar across on the A string, it is a minor 7. Meaning, if I want to play like this C, and I bar all the way across, that's now a C minor 7 chord, which is kind of cool. Sounds really rich and neat. What's the difference in sound, do you think? Well, here's C minor 7, here's C minor. Do you hear much of a difference? It's kind of subtle, isn't it? That's mostly to do with the fact I'm playing a high G ukulele, so it's just this note changing here. But this sound is just a little bit more fun than this one. This one's kind of like rainy and dreary. This one is a little bit more rainy and fun, right? But that minor 7 can just add a ton to different sounds. And using combinations of minor 7s, major 7s, and dominant 7s, also again just known as 7s, which, wow, this is a lot of information, right? But just using chords like this is how a lot of different styles of music are created. If you want to play something jazzy, you know, if I play a chord progression that goes something like this, if I just go... Did that sound very jazzy to you? Well, how about we do it like this? jazzy that is, right? Really cool. One of my favorite progressions. If you're a little bit more of an advanced player and you want to play along with that, it's a C minor 7, which is bar all the way across the 3rd fret. And that's a tricky chord, F7. What you do there is play an F, and then you take your ring finger, place it here on the 3rd fret of the C string, and you can take your pinky and place it on the 3rd fret of the A string. It's quite tricky. All 4 fingers are engaged, but it's a cool sound. And then the very last chord that we're going to play is a B flat major 7. B flat major 7. Just like say that out loud. How cool does that sound, right? Or, all right, all that we're going to do there is we're going to leave this index finger where it is. We're going to take the pinky off, and we're going to flip flop the middle and the ring finger. So the ring finger comes up to the 3rd fret of the G string, and the middle finger goes down to the 2nd fret of the C string. And this, one of my favorite chords. You hear me say that a lot. I like a lot of chords on the ukulele. But it's amazing how jazzy things start to sound when you start adding things like 7s. And it can completely alter the sound of whatever it is you're playing. I'll routinely, when I'm doing an arrangement of something, will decide to use chord extensions to kind of flavor the sound of the song a little bit in different ways. Right? Now, at the same time, though, you could take something like that and use different types of 7 chords to create an entirely different type of sound. So if I did my first chord instead, so I was playing, that C minor 7, if I played a C7 instead, just as kind of a sound here, and then I played the F7, and then like a B flat 7, you can hear how this is now very bluesy in its vibe, right? And that's what we're going to be kind of leading into today, is we're going to learn how to play some blues stuff. And we're going to do it in a much easier way than those tricky 6 chords. Much, much easier than that. But the trick to making something sound like the blues is actually really simple. It's just you make the chords 7 chords, specifically the dominant 7 chords. And a blues progression is just what we call a 1-4-5. I mean, there's obviously a lot more to it than that sometimes, but at its basic level, it's a 1-4-5, like maybe you play C, F, and G, or in this case, we're going to play it in the key of A, which is going to be the A chord, a D chord. Oh, D's so hard, right? Don't worry, we'll talk about that in a second. Then an E chord. Oh my God, no one likes E, right? That's so difficult. But if you listen to this, does this sound very bluesy? No. And that's because I'm just playing a 1-4-5. I was just playing A major, D major, E major. Which, by the way, all these chords are hard too, right? A might not be that bad, but D and E can be pretty tricky. Instead, I'm going to change them to 7 chords. So we take our A chord, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add that 7. So we'll do this process just one more time on this chord. There's 2 A notes here. I've got one A note here on the 2nd fret of the G string and one A note here on the open A. I'm going to lower this one by 2 frets, and I'm going to play now 0, 1, 0, 0, which is an A7 chord, and sounds pretty good. The next chord I'm going to play, instead of a D, I'm going to play a D7. Now we're going to cheat a little bit here, because sometimes when we play chord extensions, we might not play all the notes in the chord. How many of you have played a D7 like this before? Does that look familiar, right? 2, 0, 2, 0. It's funny because there's no D note in this D7. So is it a D7? Technically it's an F sharp diminished, but at the end of the day, it's more about the implication of sound rather than just purely what notes are played. So we can play this as our D7, and for today, that's what we're going to do. We're going to play 2, 0, 2, 0 as our second chord. So the first one was the A7. We're going to take that index finger, move it up to the G string 2nd fret, middle finger here on the E string 2nd fret, and we're going to play that. All right. And then the last chord we're going to play is an E. No, not an E. I wouldn't do that to you. We're friends here. We're instead going to play an E7. And to play E7, you may have played it before, but if you haven't, go ahead and play a G7, which looks like this, with the middle finger here on the 2nd fret of the C string, index finger here on the 1st fret of the E string, and the ring finger here on the 2nd fret of the A string. And now take that index finger and move it up to the 1st fret on the G string instead. You may have never built an E7 with that thought process before. You may also have, which is great, but the more ways that you can build chords, the better off of a player you'll be. So sometimes it's cool to kind of build something you know, and then just change one little piece of it. But let's go and play that. That's our E7. And that is all we need for a blues. So what we're going to do is we're going to start playing the blues. And if you've been around for these lessons that I've done here on UKC, you will be able to actually solo if you want to. If you remember back to some of our earlier sessions, we talked about soloing on just one string. If you play just the open A string and you play wherever there's a marker on it. Remember, we talked about this a few weeks ago. 3, 5, 7, 10, 12, 15. You might have the dots on the side being the thing that you look at. But you can solo if you'd rather than strum. And we're going to make some music now playing these chords. So I'm going to say the chord as we're going to it. And again, if you stumble on the chord, totally fine. You can go to soloing or just wait till you hear a chord that's familiar. But let's go ahead and hear it. It should sound something like this. 2 and 3 and 4 and A7. And we're going to get ready here to switch to the D7. Back to the A7 here. Get ready for that E7. It's going to come here in just a moment, right now. Back to the D7, A7, and back to the E7. And we're going to go back to the A7 and sit there a while. If you want, you can solo on that A string, which is quite fun, right? Just play where the dots are. In the meantime, go to the D7, back to the A7, E7, D7, A7, back to the E7, and we'll end it there on the A7. But you could just play that open A string on any of these dots, which is kind of fun. Tying back just to an earlier lesson, right? But the chord extension adds so much to that, right? You know, it sounds like the blues now. If I just played A, D, and E, it doesn't really sound anything like the blues. And it's because chord extensions add texture, flavor, and color to chords that can really elevate them to different heights. If you study more about music theory, you can learn things about, we just talked about 7 chords. You can also do 9s and 11s and 13s where you just add more notes. Do you see a problem though with the ukulele when we start adding more numbers? We had our 1, 3, 5, and 7. And then we add a 9. 5 notes, 4 strings might become a problem. But actually, I think is a big benefit because we prioritize what the most important notes are as we're learning on the instrument. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself now. There's lots of different things to chord extensions and chord theory. You can add 6s as well, which are kind of the same as 13s, but we won't go down that rabbit hole right now. Just when you see those extra numbers at the ends of chords, don't be intimidated. See if you can just use some of these concepts we talked about here today to maybe figure it out. Again, like the major 7's down 1 step, the dominant 7 or 7 is down 2 steps. And from there, you should be able to start creating some different sounds, including the blues or jazzy stuff or whatever it might be. Just like I mentioned in our last session, this is overwhelming stuff. There's a lot of information that we've talked about here today, and there's a lot of stones that are unturned for how all of this works. Mainly because this is a concept that's much richer than a single session here. And so when you're working on this, if you're watching this video as a recording, just try to focus on one thing to grab onto that you didn't know before and get comfortable with. And then maybe watch the video again and find that second thing. Or when you watch a video later with somebody else, see if one of those little things you got from this video can apply there. And it's those little things that get stacked on top of each other to create a really good understanding. So it's okay if you're stressed. I was too as I was learning this stuff. Just try to get that one nugget. But does anybody have any questions with what we've been working on here today, or any questions in general? No questions? Cool. Well, any questions outside of the concepts that we talked about in today's session? Maybe questions from earlier ones, or just any generic ukulele questions you might have? Cool, no worries. Well, as always with this stuff, it's okay to not understand everything as you're working through it. And it takes time for it all to settle in. So maybe this week, all that you're working on is playing some blues with now using 7 chords instead. And that might add a lot. Looks like we got a question in here, which is, can you talk about getting more comfortable with soloing, which is a fantastic question. Soloing is a concept that's really foreign to people because it's all about confidence. And truthfully, most of us lack confidence when we're learning something. That's just human nature, right? When we're trying to create a really good solo, the first thing to do is be comfortable in the area that you're playing with. And so with our little exercise that we worked on several sessions ago about playing on just the A string, right? That instant solo. We also talked about in the E, C, and G, right? But just the A string with this A blues. Just get really comfortable being able to go on all of these different points and jump around a little bit. And once you have that familiarity with where you're at, then the real work begins. What you want to do from that point is you want to tell a story with those notes that you have. You want to actually think of these notes as like a little vocabulary that you're building and that you're going to have a conversation with somebody when you're learning to solo. If you think about it, really good solos are like conversations that you have. So to give kind of an example, a bad solo would be just playing a whole bunch of notes really fast and never stopping. And the parallel there is if we're talking and I just start talking, I don't stop talking, I keep going no matter what. I never take a break for any reason, no matter what, because I just want to keep having words come out of my mouth that for any reason, it doesn't matter, I'm not going to take a break, I'm just going to keep going and going and going, and it's kind of uneasy, isn't it, right? It's really off-putting to hear somebody just talk at you. So we want to make sure that we're using space, just like in a conversation. So play a couple notes and stop for a moment, and play a couple notes and stop for a longer moment. That space is critical to when you're doing a solo. Another thing is continuing to think about how you talk with how you play. So think about the tone of our voices as we're speaking. We don't usually talk in monotone where every single note is exactly the same. That's weird, isn't it, right? There are elements of pitch fluctuation and rhythmic fluctuation to how we talk. Different words have different meanings behind them on a rhythmic level, right? So if I say the word rhythm, well, how could I play the word rhythm? What do I do when I say rhythm? Well, it's going dut dut, and the pitch kind of goes high to low a little bit, right? I'm going rhythm. I'm not going rhythm, I'm going rhythm. So maybe that's rhythm, right? So what if I want to play a little thing? Well, maybe I'm just going to say something as simple as, I've got rhythm. I've got rhythm. Well, what does the pitch do? It kind of stays a little bit even, right? I've got rhythm. And then it goes down. So maybe that's something like this. I've got rhythm. I've got rhythm. See, I played the same note a couple times in a row. It's a really good idea to do that, just like when you're talking. And you can try to write out little phrases and map them out in some way to the pitches. And that's how really good solos are created, is they're trying to emulate more of a human interaction, more of the voice talking. And whatever you do with your solo, imagine if you sang it and spoke it, would it still sound good? The answer is no. Your solo probably could use a little bit of work, but that's a whole nother lesson in its own right that we can kind of talk about. But soloing's a lot of fun, if not a little bit scary. So any other questions at all? Cool. Well, no worries. I hope you guys all have a fantastic weekend. As always, if you have any questions, I always make sure that at the beginning of these sessions we have time for any that you might have. And if you're watching this as a recording, we do these different sessions here at the UKC, and I hope to see you in a session soon. So thank you guys so much. Have a fantastic weekend. I'll talk to you soon. Take it easy.
Happy Father's Day.
Oh, thank you. See you later.
La 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 la.